if a student requests an accommodation with regard to a pronoun, even if you don't think that this makes any sense, even if many people don't think that it makes any sense, might not making some effort to go forward with that accommodation put you on much stronger footing then for your opposition to C16 and the sort of legislation of this type of language? I'm thinking out loud. I don't know what you think.
Well, I don't know if it would put me on stronger footing. It would certainly be easier, I can tell you that. Um,
In this video, David Pakman leaves Jordan Peterson completely defenseless. So right out of the gate, you can already tell Pakman isn't here to play at all. Like he's calm, he's logical, and he just starts poking holes into Peterson's usual talking points without even getting heated. You're gonna see how Pakman just pushes back hard on all the fear-mongering about pronouns in these ideological battles that Peterson will just bring up and try to hide behind. And honestly, it doesn't even take that long before the cracks just start to show. Pearson just keeps trying to sound deep, but like you'll notice real quick that he's mostly leaning onto vibes and not actual arguments. It just gets more obvious the deeper they go. So make sure to watch till the end to see how David Pakman leaves Jordan Peterson completely defenseless in this debate.
it isn't obvious to me that the appropriate thing to do when you're compelled to use words that you don't agree with, that the right thing to do is to go ahead and use them. So I regard the made-up pronouns, the je and je and so forth, as part of the vanguard of this postmodern movement. And
Sure, but in what way are you hurt by just doing that? If it makes a student more comfortable, if it makes them take more away from the class, because as they see it, not as you see it, maybe not as I see it, but as they see it, they're being addressed in the way that they want to be addressed. In what way is that jeopardizing you or your teaching or the material in class, for example?
well, I don't think there's any evidence that it will make things better for them. It's just a supposition. In fact, I think that the demand to be marked out with the special use of pronouns, which, by the way, don't change very frequently
Sure.
in the English language, they're very fixed words. I think the demand backed by law to be marked out in some special way is not something that's going to make anyone feel better, except perhaps very temporarily. And I think it's a bad medium to long-term strategy.
But that's
So-
your opinion, right? I mean, in other words, if we have the opinion about that from the person who is actually making the request and the opinion of someone who merely is refusing to use it, should we not at least give equal weight, if not more, to the opinion? Again, we're talking about two opinions of the person directly affected. I don't know. Again, I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm not even saying I agree with these pronouns.
Well, the issue here is that I think the danger of using legislated language, especially that's part of a philosophical battle, let's call it an intense intellectual battle that's going on in the university campuses and that will increasingly flood out into the normative world outside the campus. I think that ceding control over language to your ideological opponents, let's say, is a large mistake.
Right off the bat here, Pearson's trying to like frame it all super dramatic, acting like using someone's preferred pronouns is basically surrendering in some giant ideological war. And okay, like sure, you can kinda see where he's coming from if you squint really hard. And like yeah, language does have a power. And if a government forces you to say stuff, that's something worth talking about. But Pakman's point is just way more clear and understandable. He's basically just saying if this tiny thing helps a student feel more respected and learn better, how is that a threat to your class? Your job is to teach, not just win some imaginary battle in your head. And Pearson, instead of just answering that really simple and honestly, like very fair question, just completely dodges and starts ranting about ceding control of the language and vanguard of postmodernism, like he's on some kind of conspiracy podcast.
I regard the postmodern philosophy, the radical postmodern philosophy, as something that is exceedingly dangerous, and the Marxism that it's nested inside, which I'm not imagining. Derrida, for example, stated clearly that his philosophy was a transmutation of Marxism that was nested inside it. I think that if you cede verbal territory to your ideological opponents, then you lose. And you might say, well, does it matter if you're hurting someone's feelings? And of course, hurting someone's feelings is a bad thing if you can avoid it. But losing in a very important ideological battle is a much worse thing. And I don't think that people understand the seriousness of this battle, although they will come to understand it over the next few years as it continues to play itself out. I mean, part of the reason that the American election tilted the way it did was because a relatively small number of people, and there are multiple reasons, of course, were tired of politically correct demands. And the problem with postmodernists is that whenever they want to make a move forward in their attempts to undermine the categorical structure of the patriarchy, they always pick a victim group and to use as a front so that they can claim that what they're doing is motivated by compassion and that their enemies are bigots and horrible people. And I think that that's a absolutely awful way of maneuvering politically, although it's extraordinarily effective.
Yeah,
And
I don't
as
know
I
how
said-
effective it is. I mean, I think in many ways, identity politics is increasingly not effective, and I've been hugely critical, in fact, of the American left for that, the use of that to the extent that they do. I just go back to the idea that I believe your criticism of C16 would be seen much more favorably if maybe you appeared less, and I know you're saying you're not actually hostile to transgender individuals, if you appeared less hostile to transgender individuals through your class.
You could make that case, but look, it's a mystery why what I did attracted so much attention, right? Because all I did was make 2 videos and put them up on my YouTube site.
Yeah.
They weren't particularly well produced, but they produced an absolute storm of controversy, far more than I would have ever hoped for and far more than I would have ever wanted. I believe the reason that they produced the controversy is actually because I took something that's a universal problem, which is this ideological battle, and I made it about something extraordinarily specific, which was my specific refusal to use these made-up words. And so that's produced somewhat of a backlash, although I've received, at least in terms of the letters that I've received, far more support, and more support too from the press, at least in Canada, than criticism.
It's honestly starting to show how deep Pearson is stuck in his own little world. Instead of answering Pakman's really fair point, maybe you wouldn't catch so much heat if you didn't come off as super hostile, Pearson just immediately spins off into this giant conspiracy about postmodernism and ideological warfare. And look, I get that he's super passionate about philosophy and history, and that's fine, but dude, you're teaching classes. You're not fighting in some revolutionary battle every time a student asks for basic respect. Pakman even gives him a chance to chill out and maybe show some humanity, but Pearson just can't stop himself. He says hurting someone's feelings is bad if you can avoid it, but then turns around and says losing an ideological battle is way worse. Bro, you're literally admitting you're willing to hurt people over theological fear. That's the contradiction here. Pakman stays calm, pointing out that even he is critical of identity politics sometimes, but that doesn't excuse being hostile to individuals. And Pearson just basically shrugs it off by saying it's a mystery why people get mad, even though he just finished explaining exactly why. Because he made it personal instead of keeping it academic. You can't have it both ways, man.
And in an issue like this, you're going to generate some criticism and some support. And so far, mostly what I've generated is support. And it's conceivable that someone else could have done a better job of this. And it's conceivable as well that I could have done a better job of it. But it's an element of conscience for me not to use this postmodern neo-Marxist language, because I've studied history quite intently, and I understand the dangers both of postmodernism and of the Marxist philosophy within which it's based. And I've read very much about how societies start to tilt in pathological directions, and one way they start is by transmutation of language. And so there's always a price to be paid if you stand up for something, because there's proximal consequences, and the proximal consequences are that it appears that I'm hurting the feelings of some transgender people. although it isn't really clear to me that that's the case, especially given that I've received far more letters of support from transgender people than letters of criticism.
Yeah.
It's not self-evident that the people who are the activists on behalf of the transgender population are their appropriate representatives. Who says that they're speaking for them? It's just a claim, and I don't buy it. And so I'll use their proper names, which the Ontario Human Rights Commissioner agreed was acceptable.
Wrapping us up, it's honestly just kind of sad how Pearson just keeps looping back to the same old talking points. Like, he gets all these chances to actually focus on the real people being affected, and instead he just keeps dragging it back to some massive ideological war that nobody else is even fighting. He even downplays hurting trans students by claiming activists don't really represent them. Which, like, come on, that's just a cop-out. Pakman stayed calm the whole time, gave him every chance to sound reasonable, and Pearson still ended up looking like he's fighting shadows instead of answering basic questions. The whole thing just shows how much bias there is when people frame debates around made-up culture war battles instead of just dealing with the actual human beings in front of them. And speaking of bias, are you getting tired of getting news from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing, and another says the complete opposite? How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, whether it's left, right, or center, are covering the same story, so you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get a 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights in media bias and political trends. So stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.